everyone, and welcome back to my channel. Today we are doing my reading wrap-ups for both September and October. I was able to read 35 books during these 2 months, but at the end of September and the beginning of October, I had a lot of things going on. I was really busy, had a big family vacation that occurred, so I didn't really have a whole lot of time to do a separate video for my September wrap-up, so I thought I would just combine them. But during those 2 months, I was able to read 2 of my 23 books to read in 2023, and that included The Blood Gift, which is the final book in the duology by N.E. Davenport, and Yellowface by RF Kuang. Pretty early on into the month of September, I completed my 2023 goal of reading 150 books, so everything past this is just a bonus, but I do love looking at this spread all filled out and complete. It does give me a very weird sense of satisfaction. Moving on to my physical TBR tracker, I was only able to read one of my books, and that was Kayla, but it does bring this up to my 15th book that I'm knocking off of my physical TBR list, so I feel like I've accomplished a lot already. And is it just me, or do a lot of books come out in the months of September, October, and November? My bank account wasn't too happy, but it'll get over it because I was able to acquire quite a bit of books on this list, and some of them I've already read, and I will talk about those later on during the review section. Now on to my favorite challenge of every year, that is the ABC challenge. We are getting very close to completion. I had 2 books I got to add this time around, and that was the K spot with Kayla and the Y spot with Yellowface. I am having some trouble locating a J book, so if any of y'all have any recommendations, be sure to leave those down in the comments. My 2 favorite books these past 2 months were actually ARCs that I received, and for September, that was the Hurricane Wars by Thea Guanzon, and then for October, that was the Unmaking of June Farrow by Adrienne Young. For our book club picks, our theme for September was thriller, so we picked Recursion by Blake Crouch. This is my first Blake Crouch book, and I really liked it, so I think I will continue reading more of his books. And then for October, our theme was Leaves on the Cover, and we selected The Immortalists by Chloe Benjamin. For my Read More Diversely reading challenge, I read 2 books by Latinx Hispanic authors in the months of September, October, and then I read 1 book by an Indigenous author during the month of October. So no change here. I pre-made my covers for both months with some scrapbooking paper that I had, and of course some stickers to highlight my demographics. To make these videos go by a lot faster, it's just easier for me to make them in advance, that way I'm not spending too much time on film recording these, and it helps me a lot in the editing process as well. But that is why you don't really ever see me making these title pages. Of course, they're just collage style pages with craft paper layered on top of one another. And then as previous spreads, my month title and all of my demographic charts that I make in Canva are printed out on sticker paper, which I do link in the description. For September demographics, I will say that this was probably my least favorite reading month. Both the ratings of the books I read and the demographics of the books I read weren't very diverse. A lot of 3-star rating books, but for the mood, most of them were adventurous, funny, and dark. And then the genres, of course, most were fantasy, YA, and a few romances sprinkled in. But for my demographics, 10 were by Caucasian authors, 5 were either by or had LGBTQIA representation, 3 were by AAPI authors, and 1 was by a Black or African author. And then for my ratings, I had 2 5-star ratings and 4 4-star ratings, but I had 9 3-star rating books and 1 2-star rated books. And then of course, per usual, the main format of the books that I read were in audio while the rest were digital, but only one book I read was by an indie author, the rest were traditionally published. But moving on to my reviews, this month I read 16 books, but I only thought that 6 of them were worth talking about for this, and that includes my first book, which was Ejaculate Responsibly. This was actually the book that helped me complete my 2023 reading challenge, so when Goodreads throws that celebration at you, I thought it was hilarious that this was the book that helped me reach my goal. But my pretty simple review is that every human being needs to read this book. It's a new way to think about abortion. It's very short. I listened to it on audiobook and gave it 5 stars. Another really great thought-provoking book that I read this month was The Free People's Village by Sim Kern. I read another one of their books earlier this year during the Trans Rights Readathon, and I really loved it, so it was no surprise that I enjoyed this book as well. This is a reimagining of a world where Al Gore won the 2000 election and declared a war on climate change instead of the war on terror. Sim Kern delivers a compelling story that tackles essential topics with unapologetic honesty. It's a novel that doesn't just entertain, but also serves as a mirror to our world, urging readers to confront the challenges we face in addressing climate change, social justice, and political inequality. Sim is a really great storyteller, so I highly recommend you check this out. I gave both books 5 stars. Moving on to my next book, which is Kekai by Vaishnavi Patel. This is a retelling of the Indian epic Ramayana, and I really enjoyed this book. It takes the character of Kekai and breathes new life into her, allowing us to witness her transformation from a headstrong young girl into a formidable and loyal queen. And what sets this book apart is its focus on a character who often takes a back seat in traditional retellings. I listened to this on audiobook and gave it 4 stars. My next book is Soul of the Deep, which is the conclusion to the Skin of the Sea duology. This is a really nice conclusion to the story, which focuses on a mermaid who is tasked with ferrying souls of taken slaves who die in the crossing. And on this one, she in particular is determined to stop the demons who are coming from the world that inhabit the world that she lives in as a mermaid, and to hopefully reunite with her love. I listened to it on audiobook and gave it 4 stars. And moving on to my final 2 books, the first one is One Dark Window, which is the first in this dark fantasy duology. I really liked this book. I liked our main character Elsbeth, who was very compelling and complex, and the entire supporting cast of characters were also brilliantly crafted, each with their own unique qualities and quirks. And the magic system in this book is exceptionally unique. Rachel Gellick has constructed a world where the magic system is both mysterious and enticing, and I couldn't get enough of the different elements at play. And of course, the dark and gothic atmosphere that permeates the story is the cherry on top of this already enjoyable book. I highly recommend, and for the month of October, I will talk about its sequel and the final in this duology, To Twisted Crowns. But before that, I wanted to talk about my favorite book of the month, which was The Hurricane Wars. This is a Raylo retelling, but to be honest, I didn't really see that much of it once I got more into the book. This was a debut by Thea Guanzon, and it does take a bit of Filipino lore and mythology and includes it in here, but I thought Thea did a great job with her debut in creating a really interesting world with interesting magic and characters, and I read it in a digital format and gave it 4 stars. I also gave 4 stars to One Dark Window. And moving on to October, this month definitely made up for the lackluster month that was September. I had a lot of really good reads, and it was actually kind of hard for me to pick just 8 to share, but I hopefully picked out a good selection for y'all. Anyways, similar to all my other months, just a pre-made little collage here for the title page and the demographics. For the demographics, these were a little bit more diverse and the ratings were a little bit better, actually a lot better than last month. But for my demographics, 10 books that I read of the 19 were by Caucasian authors, 2 were by AAPI authors, 2 were by Black or African authors, 2 were by Middle Eastern or Arab authors, 2 were by Hispanic, Latin, or Latinx authors, and 1 was by an indigenous author. And then the mood of my books this month were mostly adventurous, mysterious, dark, tense, pensive, and emotional. While the main genres were, of course, fantasy, thriller, YA, romance, and literary. But for my ratings, I had 5 5-star books, 6 4-star books, 4 3-star books, and 2 2-star books. Almost over half of them were in the audio format, while the other half were in digital. But I read no books by indie authors this month. They were all traditionally published. Starting off with one of the first books I read this month, which was one of our book club selections, and that was Recursion by Blake Crouch. This is a novel that had me completely and utterly glued to its pages from the very first chapter. The story delves into the concept of false memories and time manipulation, throwing our two protagonists into a world where the past and present intertwine in astonishing ways. This was a very thought-provoking exploration of the intricacies of time, memory, and the human experience. And if you're a fan of fast-paced, intelligent thrillers with a touch of science fiction, then I highly recommend this book for you. I listened to it on audiobook and gave it 4 stars. Next, we have Never Whistle at Night. This is an anthology of indigenous authors in the dark fiction genres, so all of these stories were by indigenous authors, some that I've read before and some that were new to me, but they all focused around very dark themes in the fiction genre, so I definitely recommend you check out the trigger warnings before you read this book. But it was a really great anthology and introduced me to some really great authors that I will look out for in the future, and I did read this in a digital advanced copy format, and I gave it 4 stars. Next, we have the Two Twisted Crowns book, which is a sequel to One Dark Window by Rachel Gillig. This served as a superb conclusion to this dark fantasy duology, and I absolutely loved the shift in perspective from Elsbeth to Raven and Elm. It breathed new life into the story, and it offered fresh insights into their characters and expanding the narrative scope. One of the highlights of the book is the witty banter and complex dynamic between Raven and the Nightmare, who was my favorite character from the first book. Since this book just came out, I do not want to give away any spoilers, but I will say for those of you who enjoyed the first book, this second installment definitely will not disappoint. I read this in a digital format and gave it a very, very high 4 stars, almost 5 stars. Next up is my favorite book of the month, The Unmaking of June Farrow by Adrienne Young. This was an enchanting story that managed to weave together elements of mystery, romance, and a captivating journey to change one's fate. One of the more engaging aspects of this book was attempting to solve the Farrow curse mystery alongside June, and it's a credit to the author's skill that I didn't anticipate the reveal. I was literally in the middle of the night gasping once the big reveal occurred, and I couldn't get enough. I'm still thinking about this book, even after finishing it weeks ago. But of course, I had to give it 5 stars. Next up is another book that took me by surprise. I received an advanced copy of this, and based on my dislike for Allie's first book, The Love Hypothesis, I was a little hesitant about this one, but Check and Mate is her first YA romance, and it takes readers on a journey through the intense and competitive world of professional chess, delivering a heartfelt rivals to lovers story. One of the strengths of this book is its ability to hold your attention, evident from the fact that I read this in a single day. But to be honest, I thought it was a really sweet and really well done story. It just shows you that Allie's getting better as she starts to write more books, so I think this might have convinced me to read more of her upcoming books. I read this digitally, not on audiobook, but I did give it 4 stars. And then we have Yellowface. It took me a while to review this book after I read it, just of the impact that it had on me. I listened to it in audiobook in less than a day, and again, same with June Farrell, but I am still thinking about that book even after reading it. But it's basically a necessary and eye-opening read that challenges the status quo and raises vital questions about who gets to tell which stories. It's a book that will linger in your thoughts long after you've turned the last page, serving as a powerful reminder of the work that still needs to be done in the fight for genuine representation and inclusion in literature and the publishing industry as a whole. I gave it 5 stars, and again, listen to it on audiobook. And finally, we have my final 2 books, which are Together We Burn by Isabella Banez. This is a captivating YA dragon fighting fantasy romance. I was drawn into this unique world of dragon fighting, which was basically a spin on the matadors and bullfighting of Spain, and the dynamic between our 2 protagonists, Zarella and Arturo. Banez's rich and immersive descriptions made it easy to picture the dragons, feel the tension in the air, and sense the emotions of the characters. While the plot did meander at times, I found myself thoroughly enjoying the overall narrative, and the elements of action, mystery, and romance were all well balanced. I listened to this on audiobook and gave it 4 stars. And then lastly, we have one of my most anticipated reads of the year, which is the conclusion to the Once Upon a Broken Heart series by Stephanie Garber with A Curse for True Love. I pretty much read this the day that it came out because I wanted to know what happened after that crazy cliffhanger from the second book, but basically, it was a bittersweet farewell to this enchanting world. While the story's progression maintained its momentum, there were a few elements that left me with mixed feelings, but one of the highlights of this series has undeniably been the dynamic between Evangeline and Jax. Their complex relationship added a layer of charm to the narrative, but it was disappointing that we didn't get to see them interact too much in this installment, and the ending, I think, could have been a bit better. But despite these minor gripes, I still found immense enjoyment in this trilogy as a whole, and Garber does have a knack for storytelling that is undeniably magical. So if you're looking for a new trilogy, I highly recommend this one. I listened to it on audiobook and gave it 4 stars. But here is my full reading wrap-up for September and October. If you're curious to see the other books that I read these months, or just this year in general, be sure to go follow me and friend me on Goodreads, which is linked below. You can see all the other books that I read and the reviews that I've given for those. But again, if you like this video and want to see more, be sure to hit that like and subscribe button. So until next time, happy reading everyone.